The position you're looking at right now is the key position of the Italian opening. Chances are it was the very first opening you learned in your chess journey, and it's the most popular opening in history. That said, I promise you're going to learn something new in this video. Let me show you 10 ways to win in the Italian opening. In this position, your opponent has two main choices. They'll either play bishop to c5, transitioning into the giuoco piano, or knight to f6, which leads to the two knights defense. Let's start with the most popular variation, bishop to c5. This move doesn't pose any immediate threats, so white has several options to continue. You could play c3, preparing d4, castle, or push the pawn to d3. But the move I'm going to recommend is one you probably haven't seen before. It's the move d4. This is the Italian gambit. This gambit involves sacrificing a pawn, which can be captured in three different ways. Your opponent can take it with the pawn, the bishop, or the knight, and each of these captures leads to some fascinating lines of play. Let's break it down. Capturing with the pawn is easily the riskiest option for black, because now we can play c3, offering a second pawn. If they ignore this offer, we'll simply recapture on d4 and establish two strong central pawns. The most common response, however, is actually taking the pawn, which is already a mistake, because we have the sequence bishop takes f7, king takes f7, and queen to d5 with check. This allows us to recover the material we sacrificed while also stripping black of their right to castle. At this point, they might play king to e8 or king to d8, and we'll capture the bishop, putting ourselves on the path to victory. If instead of taking with the pawn, your opponent captures with the knight, they'll leave their e5 pawn undefended, which we'll happily take with our knight. At this point, black has to deal with the double threat we're posing to the f-pawn. The most common response is knight to e6, placing the knight in front of the pawn. But this is a big mistake, as we can simply capture it with the bishop. If they recapture with the f-pawn, we play queen to h5 with check. This is a very common tactical pattern. If they try to block the check by playing g6, we'll take on g6 with the knight, and they won't be able to recapture because our queen is pinning the h-pawn to their rook. The most natural move, then, is knight to f6, attacking our queen. Here, they expect us to take the rook, leaving our queen undefended, without realizing that the discovered check they're planning is ineffective, since the piece delivering the check can be captured by their knight. But that's not what we're going to do. We'll capture the bishop, which is undefended on c5. After they recapture our knight, not only do we win a pawn, but we also completely ruin their kingside pawn structure. They'll be left with an isolated pawn and no chance to castle. From here, we can continue with bishop to g5, or, alternatively, queen to c3. Now, if they decide to recapture with the d-pawn instead, the solution is straightforward. Trade queens. This forces their king away from defending f7, and then you win the game with knight takes f7, delivering a strong double attack. Another common way for your opponent to defend against the double threat on f7 is by playing queen to f6, aiming to generate counterplay. By allowing the capture on f7, they're hoping to follow up with a move like knight to e6, blocking the check while creating threats of their own. But don't worry, this is just a trap. Simply capture with the bishop, and your position becomes overwhelmingly strong. We can also retreat the knight to d3, allowing the exchange of bishops. If they take our bishop, we'll take theirs, eliminating any threats they might have had, securing a pawn advantage, and ensuring they can't castle. Enjoying the video so far? If you are, please hit the like button so I can keep bringing you high-quality, free content here on YouTube. Capturing with the bishop is the best move for black in this scenario. We'll recapture the bishop, and in return for the pawn, we'll gain a highly active position. From here, we can castle and start destabilizing black's position by playing f4, for example, to challenge the e5 pawn. If they play knight to f6, our response is f4. They can't take the pawn because the knight would be left undefended. They also can't capture the e4 pawn, as we take on e5 and then win the f7 pawn. If their knight retreats, it would still end up undefended. And castling isn't an option either, as we'd capture on e5, putting both of their knights under threat again. To avoid this, black should play d6. At this point, we capture on e5 and follow up with bishop to g5, creating two threats against the pinned knight. This will likely ruin black's pawn structure. That pawn will become weak, castling will no longer be safe, and the resulting position is fairly balanced. This demonstrates that white isn't the only side fighting for victory in the Italian opening. Now, let me show you some traps black can use. If you move your knight to f6, entering the two knights defense, one of the most common moves you'll encounter from white is knight to c3. This move defends the e4 pawn. However, it's not considered a good move because we as black can immediately take advantage by playing knight takes e4. The idea is that after they capture it, we'll regain the material by advancing the pawns at d5, and the resulting position is clearly better for black. After the sequence of exchanges involving the bishop and queen, even if white gains a tempo on our queen, we'll reach a position where we're the only ones with a central pawn and have a lead in development. However, even if our opponent doesn't play knight to c3, we still have plenty of traps in the two knights defense. In fact, this line is so aggressive for black that it might as well be called the two knights counterattack. If our opponent insists on attempting the Fegatello attack, we have a very interesting defense that I'm almost certain you've never seen before. We'll play the pawn to d5, blocking their bishop. After they take the pawn, instead of going for the standard knight to a5 defense, known as the Palerio defense, which is what you'll often see grandmasters play, or recapturing the pawn on d5, which would allow a very dangerous knight sacrifice from white, we'll play the pawn to b5. This move is super interesting. If white takes our knight, which looks undefended, we just take their bishop and the position stays pretty balanced. The downside for white is that their knight will be completely out of play and they'll have to waste time repositioning it. That pawn will eventually fall and we can defend the other one. Now, what if our opponent plays correctly? They could capture the pawn on b5 and pin a piece, which at first looks like a big problem for us. But actually, that's not the case. We open the b file, letting our bishop develop to b7, and then we take the pawn on d5. After trading the bishop for the knight, we can use that diagonal to launch a strong attack. The most common move here is for them to castle. We respond with bishop to b7, threatening checkmate, and from there, we get an easy attack by pushing pawns on the king side. Take note, f3 is white's usual response, but it instantly loses to the sequence h6 followed by g5. Our plan is simple. Push the pawn to g4. If they play knight to f2 trying to stop it, you still go ahead with g4. When the knight captures, our knight recaptures, and they can't take back because their pawn is pinned and there's a checkmate threat. Even if white tries something else, like playing queen to e2 instead of knight to f2, it's fine. They might threaten the e-pawn, but just let them take it and castle queenside. If they go for the pawn, we still push g4, and our attack is just too strong. The computer already gives black a plus 6.5 advantage here. Since I know that the Fegatello attack is every beginner's worst nightmare, I'm here to teach you another variation that's just as interesting, the Fritz variation, which you can use against it. Instead of going for knight to a5 again, this time it's knight to d4. What's the idea behind this move? If our opponent attacks the knight, we counter that by pushing the pawn to b5, going after their bishop with a strong counterattack. This is the Fritz variation. It's super interesting, but it comes with a trap that almost every beginner falls into. White players are often greedy and think they can still make the attack on f7 work even after playing the pawn to d6. They'll sacrifice the pawn, hoping that if you capture it with the bishop, pawn, or queen, the knight fork on f7 will still be available. And guess what? That's what we'll let them do. We capture with the queen, let them play the fork, and then respond with queen to c6. It's a sneaky move with a powerful double threat, targeting both the bishop and the pawn on g2. Moving the bishop back isn't an option, as their knight would be left hanging, and they can't take the rook either because we would capture on g2, threatening their rook. If they move the rook back, we check on e4. And from there, they'll either have to give up their queen for our knight or retreat the bishop, and you'll deliver a fantastic checkmate. So, are you still afraid of the Fegatello attack? After this video, I bet you're now hoping for your opponents to play it against you. That's all for today, folks. I'm not going to ask you to like and subscribe again because I know you've already done it. This channel is small, but I work hard to create valuable content. that gets straight to the point without wasting your time. That's it from me for now. See you in the next one.